Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, November 26th, 2025, and today we're going to be talking about a brand new poll out of Emerson College in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District, a space where there's going to be an election in roughly a week on December 2nd, a very exciting time. Just a little bit of a personal context here. This is a race that we've been tracking for quite some time, and you might know that on this channel, we always focus on the most random elections. But this one actually, I think, is going to be far more mainstream than we otherwise think, as it serves to be the first real and major election that has taken place when it comes down to something as massive as a congressional district election that will be done roughly a month after the 2025 blue wave, and a brand new shocking poll from Emerson College tells us that Democrats are in dead heat. Now, I can't say I'm necessarily surprised that this race has tightened. We've known for a while that both parties are investing, which is never a good sign, given that Donald Trump won this district in the last election, by 22 points in 2024, roughly a year ago, and now suddenly Donald Trump's first action with his super PAC that he used to win the election in 2024 is making their first set of ad buys, and already has, and invested millions of dollars now into this Tennessee district because the risk of it being lost actually feels quite tremendous. And just today, Donald Trump took to online to ask his supporters to back Matt Van Epps, the Republican nominee for Congress here in Tennessee's 7th District. And it's a special election that Emerson College now tells us is a 2-point race between the Republican who still starts out and maintains that frontrunner status, but is within that margin of error, as it was in 3.9% in this poll that was fielded amongst likely voters and those who have already voted between November 22nd and November 24th. Now, the reason why this is significant, again, this is an election that Donald Trump and the Republicans won by over 20 points last cycle. When you go on the New York Times page, they oftentimes sort by races that are the most competitive, ones that Democrats are expected to win narrowly, Republicans are expected to win narrowly, and then there's those who are on the periphery that really don't change. Democrats are expected to win easily, Republicans expected to win easily, and very rarely are there any times where any of these races really do narrow up. And in the last cycle, none of them flipped over, despite being, in certain cases, in times 2018 was a great example, some of these races that were on the safe Republican side did end up flipping. But what is notable, and I think is important to say, is that Tennessee's 7th District joined every single district in Tennessee on the Republican side in being a safe district. Nobody expected it to be competitive in the 2024 race. It certainly was not. And Donald Trump actually outran this Republican nominee for Congress. Now, Mark Green had been serving in the House for a little bit of time, not a super long time, but he took this seat, I believe, in 2018. But left office early. He's doing something in Washington, D.C., decided Congress was no longer for him. And in response, we see that it prompted this special election. Now, Republicans have nominated Matt Van Epps, who by every metric really is just a standard MAGA Trump thumper, in the state of Tennessee, which makes sense for the 7th District, given that Donald Trump won it overwhelmingly. But the fact remains, this new data tells us that we could be shocked next Tuesday. Now, we've been tracking this race for quite some time. The 7th District has been, again, like I said, at top of mind for us because it stands to be that final test of the 2025 season. It also is one of those special elections like we've been seeing across the board in this country, right? In 2025, we've had a significant number of races that are worth looking at. Arizona's 7th, Florida's 1st, Florida's 6th, Virginia's 11th, right? These are races that had Republican versus Democratic races where Republicans saw massive underperformances and Democrats saw massive overperformances. In Arizona's 7th District, Adelita Grijalva won this race by 40 in a district that Kamala Harris defeated Donald Trump by just 26. Now, 26 is obviously impressive, but to go from 26 to 40 in less than a year shows you something changed. But it wasn't just contained to Arizona. It happened in Florida. Jimmy Patronis won this race, but did so by underperforming Trump by 15 points. In Florida's 6th, same thing, 18-point underperformance. In Virginia's 11th, James Walkinshaw won by 50 points district-wide. Why is that interesting? Well, Kamala Harris won the district by roughly 34 points. That's a 16-point overperformance in less than a year. And now fast forward to this race. While Trump won it by 22, if you were to adjust that similar margin and shift that we've seen in Arizona, in Florida, right in Virginia, this race would be about a 5 to 8 point race in favor of the Republicans. But what are we seeing? Emerson College's brand new data, Democrats are within striking distance. Now, Aftyn Behn is a state representative from the state of Tennessee, obviously, right? She is in this seat. She beat out 2 other state reps in the race, and it was a contested Democratic primary. But very quickly, getting through and forward into the general election, we saw a coalition being built around Aftyn Behn. And now, both sides of the aisle see this as a truly winnable race. The only downside for the GOP is that it should have been called immediately at poll closing. Now, Tennessee's 7th district in particular reminds me a lot of a race that I'm not sure all of us remember. But we covered it here on this channel, and I actually went live on the night that Connor Lamb was elected into Congress in 2018 in a special election in a very similar district. Now, Pennsylvania is by no means Tennessee, but the district was very similar in terms of partisan composition. Donald Trump won this district by 20 points in 2016. And in the special election that both sides of the aisle realized was going to be shockingly competitive, the Democrats ended up winning with Connor Lamb. And then he served into Congress until he lost the Senate primary to John Fetterman in the state of Pennsylvania in 2022. But taking a look more specifically about what was surrounding this race, Pennsylvania's 18th district was so Republican that in 2016, despite the expectation at the time, not the actual results, that Hillary Clinton would help carry Democrats across a number of key Senate races, House races, and a demolishing victory on the presidential level, Democrats were hedging their bets everywhere. Ran strong candidates in states like Missouri, where Jason Kander came within 3 points. They were investing in states like Wisconsin, where Russ Feingold was making a comeback bid against Ron Johnson. And Deborah Ross in states like North Carolina, and investing across the board in some of these races that, arguably, today Democrats might see as not as winnable as they did back then, right? And even though it was a different day and age in Indiana, Evan Bayh, whose son is now running for a state secretary of state in Indiana, Evan Bayh came into this race, and it was a 10-point race in Indiana, right? These things would not have happened today. But a big reason why they wanted it to happen, and Democrats invested and fielded the candidates for these races, is largely because they saw a winning opportunity with Clinton at the top of the ticket and Trump, who they thought would really, really do poorly. But here's the thing. When you take a look at Pennsylvania's 18th district, not only was it on this Republicans expected to win easily column, Democrats did not even field a candidate in this district. Pennsylvania's 18th was uncontested. That's how Republican it was. And in 2014, the last time it was contested, 2012, when Obama was on the ballot and won Pennsylvania statewide, this same district went to the GOP by 28 points. And so for Democrats to have won it in 2018 really meant something. It showed that there was an appetite for Democratic leadership and winning in some of these districts that even Donald Trump, who campaigned in this district for Rick Saccone, this wasn't one of those cases where he just sat idly by. He was a massive proponent of Saccone to win the congressional seat, but he did not. And Democrats were able to overcome that in particular, and that's what we might be seeing in Tennessee. And I don't want to say that, this is a guarantee. One thing that I think is interesting and important to note in this poll is that Donald Trump won this district in 2024 by 22 points, and so did Matt Green. But the recalled vote of those who are voting in this special election is about Trump plus 13. Now, first of all, you might say, okay, that's a red flag. And to a point, I will say, if the electorate is identical to 2024, Republicans are going to win this seat quite easily. However, what we've learned very quickly is that none of these special elections mimicked the electorate of 2024. None of the regular elections in 2025 mimicked the electorate of 2024. The national popular vote, if you were to adjust, for instance, Virginia to a race, we can actually find it here, a race that you did see, Abigail Spanberger win over some Trump voters, win over some Republicans. However, when you look at the actual vote share, this was probably a Kamala Harris plus 10, plus 11 electorate in a state that she only won by 6. So the electorate was quite reshaped because that's who was excited to turn out, who was paying attention to the race, who didn't feel that the status quo made sense, that was angered enough to turn out. Whereas oftentimes, members of political parties that are in power, in this case, Republicans have the Supreme Court, House, Senate, White House, are complacent, content, with where they are right now in terms of political power, and oftentimes do not turn out in the same way that the opposition party does. Great example is 2010. Republicans picked up 63 seats in the House of Representatives, not because Democrats suddenly changed their minds in all these districts. The difference in turnout was astounding. In 2008, on the presidential level, Barack Obama turned up turnout to 62% nationwide. In the House, roughly identical, about 61% turnout. In 2010, turnout dropped to a record low of 41%. But who benefited? The Republican Party and the Tea Party movement, that Democrats who had such substantial majorities for a few months in the Senate had 60 seats, a filibuster-proof majority in the U.S. Senate. And by 2010, Republicans demolished them. Not because Democrats didn't exist anymore. By 2012, Barack Obama won re-election easily. But rather because they did not turn out in an election that arguably mattered a lot more than people realize. And that could be the case in Tennessee 7th. So while I think there have been some takeaways from members of the right that say, well, this is a Trump plus 13 recalled vote, it's wrong. Well, maybe not. Maybe we're working with a substantively different electorate than the one that voted a year ago. Because that has exactly been the case in every single election that has taken place since Trump's inauguration. And I think I have to remind those two, because I've seen it as the talking point from, Republican surrogates on Twitter, online, on the media. This poll broke in the morning. I woke up at 8 a.m. and I saw it and I said, holy crap, should I run to my computer and record this video? Unfortunately, I did not do that. I ended up, working. But other than that, looking at the Tennessee 7th district race, if Trump recalled vote share here is plus 13%, if Trump's recalled vote share is winning over Kamala Harris by double digits, and the Republican is only up by 2, what does that say? What does that say about the 13%, margin that it has for the president that is translating to 11 points less on a congressional level? Because translate that to what we might see, sure, there might be some level of discontent with Trump, but that is massive. That is massive. And remember, a Trump plus 13 electorate, what does it say his favorability rating is in this electorate? 47% and a 49% disapproval rating. 47% for the president of the United States, and I'm not really that shocked. When you look at his national numbers, it is not all that surprising that, Donald Trump is underwater by some degree, especially on a Trump plus 13 electorate. If the nation that voted for him by 2 disapproves of him by 17, that actually tracks nearly identical to what we're seeing on the national stage. But Tennessee's 7th district, for the first time, I think, in a very long time, Democrats could be seeing something happen. I do think Republicans will still win this race, though, and I want to maintain that. I've expected the Republicans to win this race from the beginning. But I do think that, like what we saw, maybe not necessarily in Pennsylvania's 18th district, but certainly in the special elections that took place, to the 115th Congress. And Georgia's 6th rings out as an election that in 2016, Tom Price, who went on to serve on, I believe, as HHS secretary or something to that degree, won his race by over 20 points in 2016, less than a year later. In June of 2017, Jon Ossoff came within 3 points. Whatever happened to him? Jon Ossoff came within 3 points in Georgia's 6th district, and Democrats said, all right, well, we didn't win this race. What is the takeaway? Republicans were celebrating, we won this race, but what does it mean when a race that goes from plus 22, 23 turns into plus 3? It foretold the most substantive amount of Democratic pickups they've seen in the House in the 21st century. It foretold a 2018 blue tsunami across the board. And Democrats ended up winning this district a year and a half later. This special election that showed a tightening and a narrowing of the race ended up predicting that Lucy McBath would defeat Karen Handel by roughly a point here in 2018 and in 2020, in a year where Republicans ended up actually significantly improving in their House margin, gained about 10 seats nationally. Lucy McBath won this seat not by a point like in 2018, but by 10 against the same candidate who had previously represented this district. And now thinking about what this might mean in 2025, again, Matt Van Epps is more likely than not going to be the next congressman from Tennessee 7th. But I wouldn't count out Aftyn Behn just yet. And I think Emerson College, which I bring up that Pennsylvania district, not to be, again, rehashing the same things we talk about. But I bring it up to say that that district in particular really strikes me as an interesting one on the Emerson perspective. Because guess which polling group got it right in 2018? Who was the most accurate and closest to the final margin? Sure, we saw one group said that Connerland would win by 4 and Monmouth said he would win by 6. But he only won by roughly a point, less than that. Emerson College was the one that showed the tightest margin and the one that accurately predicted that he would win. And looking at the date of the survey versus election day, roughly identical to what they are releasing here. And that's not necessarily amazing news for Democrats. It would predict that Matt Van Epps would win this race. But it does show that maybe they're onto something, and especially if this race is a 2, 3, even a 5, even a single-digit race, is a massive improvement for the Democratic Party. Any improvement off 22 is an improvement, but a massive one at that. And we could very well see it happen. Because I do not think that Emerson is going to be wrong on this one to the degree that, would make it so their margin of error would be 15 points. This is going to be a close race, and it is one that Republicans and Democrats alike know because they're investing millions of dollars in it. And we will see what happens in less than a week from today. It's a very exciting time. It's the final stretch of the final major election in this country for 2025. And it will likely tell us a lot about upcoming ones like 2026 and arguably beyond. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.